The fishing trawler Nadine Bell was cutting across the waters just off the coast of Key West of Florida when its sonar detected something odd. A wooden vessel adrift, unmoving, floating against the current. The boat looked aged, sun-bleached, battered by years of salt and sun. It bore no flag, no name, no movement. As the crew approached, the vessel rocked slightly, revealing no signs of life. Captain Elias Monroe, a retired Navy officer turned commercial fisherman, noted the eerie stillness. The deck was covered in bird droppings and dried seaweed. A single rusted chain hung from the side, but it wasn't the outside that chilled the crew. It was what they found inside. Lying motionless on a cot bolted to the floor was the preserved body of a man, seemingly untouched by time. His hands folded neatly over his stomach. His skin was oddly taut, almost waxy. There were no signs of decomposition or trauma. Next to him, a worn leather journal sealed in a waterproof bag and a metal case containing a GPS tracker that hadn't pinged in over 4 years. The man was later identified through fingerprints. Matthew Landry, an American tourist declared missing 5 years earlier during a sailing trip in the Gulf of Mexico. His case had long since gone cold. The last known record placed him departing from a private dock in Corpus Christi, Texas, aboard a 32-foot sloop named Calliope. He was alone. His discovery, preserved as if embalmed, would reopen one of the strangest maritime disappearance cases in recent history. Back in 2017, the disappearance had barely made national news. Matthew was 38, a marine biologist from Denver on sabbatical. According to his sister, Amanda Landry, he'd planned to spend a month at sea collecting samples and writing a paper on planktonic migration. Friends described him as focused, quiet, meticulous. On May 3rd, he checked in via satellite call to let Amanda know he'd reached the northern tip of the Yucatan Channel. The weather was calm, he sounded upbeat, and said he'd be turning back toward Florida the next morning. That was the last time anyone heard from him. The Calliope never returned to port. For days, the Coast Guard scanned hundreds of nautical miles across the Gulf, deploying C-130s, helicopters, and patrol cutters. Nothing surfaced. No debris, no signal, no mayday. It was as if Matthew and his boat had vanished into the water without a trace. The initial theory suggested that Matthew may have encountered sudden weather, capsizing in open water, but NOAA data from that period showed stable conditions. Moreover, Matthew's sloop was equipped with a Category 1 EPIRB, an emergency position indicating radio beacon, which was never activated. That raised concerns from the start. The investigation hit its first wall when the company that rented him emergency gear revealed a strange anomaly. One of the distress beacons had been manually removed from the boat inventory days before departure. When asked, Amanda confirmed that Matthew had installed his own, one he trusted more, but no records of that second beacon were found. Equally baffling was the fact that Matthew's name didn't appear on any maritime departure logs from Texas after April 30th. His boat had left quietly, unnoticed by port authorities, despite strict procedures in place since 2015 requiring all solo vessels to log exit information electronically. Either he slipped through by error, or someone deleted the record. A week after his disappearance, the Calliope's emergency bank account, used solely for marine purchases, was accessed in Veracruz, Mexico. A fuel purchase was made using a stored credit card code, but no one could verify who made it. Security cameras from the harbor were either missing or too degraded to offer usable footage. The local investigation stalled. The journal found beside Matthew's body changed everything. Though several pages had been damaged by moisture, the entries leading up to his final days were intact. His last note, dated July 12, 2017, over 2 months after he was reported missing, read, "I'm anchored, but not alone. Someone boarded 4 nights ago. He says nothing, leaves food. No violence, but I'm watched. Experts confirmed the ink and paper matched the type Matthew always used. A forensic handwriting analyst also verified the entry was authentic. Inside the boat, investigators found makeshift insulation layered against the hull and foam plastic, and what looked like strips of medical-grade cooling sheets. There was no refrigeration system, yet the internal cabin temperature was surprisingly stable even after all this time. The body bore no decomposition typical of 5 years at sea. The coroner's report was cautious, describing the preservation as unnatural, highly controlled, but not industrial. Autopsy results confirmed that embalming agents, formaldehyde and glutaraldehyde, were present in small, carefully administered amounts. There were no signs of physical trauma, cause of death undetermined. But something in the journal hinted at an even more unsettling possibility. One of the first entries, dated May 18, 2017, read, "He comes at night, never speaks. I think he waits for me to die." That line triggered a full re-examination of the case. Authorities traced the GPS device recovered with Matthew's body. Although it had stopped transmitting in 2020, data logs showed the vessel had remained at sea, moving irregularly between Cuba, the Florida Keys, and once near the Bahamas. A pattern emerged: short, looping circuits, as if someone was piloting the boat just enough to keep it drifting in international waters. Satellite records showed no commercial ships in proximity during the identified movements. Whoever moved the boat knew how to avoid detection. Photos of the Calliope taken after recovery showed one more strange detail. All identification markings, registration numbers, hull ID plates had been sanded off. But under a UV light scan, traces of the original ID code were detected: TX3105KZ, the same boat Matthew had purchased in 2015. Why it remained at sea for 5 years and how Matthew's body remained intact raised questions no one could easily answer. The FBI officially joined the investigation in late October 2022. As they dug deeper into Matthew's contacts, one name kept appearing: a fellow marine biologist named Ewan Merrill, known for his controversial private research into long-term oceanic survival. Ewan had disappeared from public life in 2016 after being denied funding by NOAA for an independent survival chamber experiment. His last known address: a boat slip in Corpus Christi, 2 rows from where Calliope had been docked. When agents tried to locate Ewan, they found nothing. No phone, no bank activity, no passport movements since 2017. What happened between Matthew and Ewan, if anything, remains speculation. But a final entry in the journal added another layer to the mystery. He asked what I fear more: drowning or drifting forever. The part that followed was smudged, illegible. The investigation was active again, but with few leads and a body that defied natural decay. The case had entered territory that left even seasoned agents unsettled. No fingerprints were found beyond Matthew's. No other DNA, just a preserved man, a silent journal, and a boat that refused to sink. In the months following the recovery of Matthew Landry's body, the investigation widened from the Gulf of Mexico to federal archives and private maritime surveillance firms. If Matthew had truly been alive for over 2 months after his reported disappearance, the entire premise of the original case would need re-evaluation. What had been seen as a tragic maritime accident now teetered closer to premeditated containment, or something worse. The journal, recovered next to the body in the drifting sloop Calliope, became the focal point of FBI profiler Nathan Kessler's analysis. It wasn't just the cryptic entries, it was the time span they covered. The handwriting, verified as Matthew's, had changed subtly across pages. Early entries were structured, lucid, almost professional. But as the weeks passed, the pen strokes grew more erratic. On one page, coherent descriptions of sea currents and strange nocturnal visits. On another, scribbled diagrams and half-sentences like engine off, not drifting, intentional stillness. On July 9th, just 3 days before the final entry, Matthew wrote, "He doesn't age. He doesn't ask. He just adjusts the temperature." That line raised questions that pulled the case deeper into uncharted territory. Investigators turned to the autopsy once more. Forensic pathologist Dr. Elias Rourke confirmed that traces of low-dose preservative chemicals were present, possibly administered via IV or absorbed through the skin using specialized medical patches, the kind used in experimental cryotherapy. But there was no sign of intravenous access or any wounds that could explain such precise chemical introduction. Then came the first breakthrough. A fragment of a fingerprint found on the journal's inside cover did not belong to Matthew. It wasn't a full print, just enough to establish that someone else had handled the journal during the months he was adrift. The FBI matched the fragment to no one in any federal or Interpol database. This print, most likely from whoever was visiting Matthew, became the center of an urgent biometric analysis. Meanwhile, analysts pulled together all known digital signals linked to the Calliope's movement. Surprisingly, a faint, low-frequency radio ping had been intercepted twice, once in January 2019 and again in mid-2021, by an amateur radio enthusiast near Fort Lauderdale. The signal matched the same frequency range used by marine weather buoys, but the tone signature was unique. A compressed audio clip embedded in the 2021 ping, once enhanced, revealed 5 seconds of what sounded like faint, rhythmic breathing, followed by a sharp mechanical click. The FBI cross-referenced shipping records in the region during both intercepts. One name returned in both, a private vessel listed under the registration Ardent Whisper, owned by a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. The yacht had no AIS, automatic identification system, record after 2017, despite its supposed size and fuel capacity. The case now had a second vessel and a potential handler. Interpol was contacted. Maritime customs at ports in Cuba, the Bahamas and Key West were reviewed for any record of the Ardent Whisper. Nothing. But in a satellite image from 2019, the blurred silhouette of a long-hull motorized vessel matching Ardent Whisper's specs appeared just 40 nautical miles from where Matthew's boat would later be recovered. Agent Kessler and his team drew a new working theory. Matthew had not simply gone missing, he had been taken or intercepted and kept alive for weeks under observation. The question was why. That answer, or part of it, emerged from a single hard drive retrieved from a rental storage unit in Austin, Texas. The unit had been registered under a false name, but payment was linked to a dormant bank account belonging to Ewan Merrill, the same marine researcher last linked to Matthew before his trip. Stored inside was a weather-sealed case with 2 backup drives labeled PRX rounds, temp log, and subject V NE trials. Inside the data files were thermal readings, video segments, and research logs from 2015 through 2017. Most chilling was a folder titled Subject V Metal 1. Among the entries was a partially corrupted text file, timestamped July 11, 2017, the day before Matthew's presumed death. Core temperature maintaining at 34.2 degrees C under insulation protocol gamma. Nutrient slurries tolerated. Mild rejection after day 53. Speech minimal. Journal entries increasing. No threats expressed. Lucidity wavering, monitor proximity reduced to 12-hour intervals, subject's refusal to escape attempts continues, behavior increasingly cooperative, unknown if induced by isolation or chemical suppression, embarking on NE trial by dusk. The file cut off. A forensic audio team extracted 3 video frames from one of the archived clips, all heavily pixelated. Frame 1. A man resembling Matthew seated inside what appears to be the interior of a dimly lit boat cabin. Frame 2, an indistinct figure standing in the background, face blurred, body clad in a dark hooded coverall. Frame 3, Matthew turning his head to the side, mouthing something barely visible. Lip readers offered one interpretation. "Why are you still here?" Amanda Landry, Matthew's sister, was brought in to confirm the identity of the man in the stills. She broke down during the interview, the first time she had seen his face in 5 years. But something didn't sit right. The final coroner's report, quietly revised in January 2023, included a new addition: slight signs of healed abrasions around the ankles and wrists, barely detectable, likely old. "Restraints," said the medical examiner. But the real twist came with the item found beneath the cot: a single USB flash drive embedded in a hollowed compartment below one of the floor panels. Its contents, 2 short audio files and a folder titled "Tell Amanda." One of the clips featured Matthew's voice, tired, slow, but undeniably him. "If they find this, I don't know who you'll think I was at the end. Just tell Amanda I didn't stop trying." It wasn't the sea. It was what followed me out of it. That final line shifted the tone of the case once again, from containment to something more strategic, calculated. Whatever had happened aboard the Calliope, it had been monitored, recorded, and possibly engineered. The embalming, the lack of decay, the preserved journal, the near-mythic drifting, it all pointed to an organized and prolonged effort to control Matthew's environment, and perhaps his story. Yet, the only clue as to why remained buried in those words. It wasn't the sea. It was what followed me out of it. The investigation now had 3 tracks: identifying the unknown fingerprint, locating the ardent whisper, and confirming the authenticity of the Tell Amanda files. As new leads emerged, the FBI issued a formal statement. Matthew Landry's death was now considered part of an active investigation into maritime abductions and unauthorized human experimentation. Still, no arrests, no named suspects, and no sign of Ewan Merrill. By early spring 2023, the Matthew Landry case had quietly become a high-level matter. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, in collaboration with the Coast Guard's Intelligence Coordination Center, had begun re-evaluating nearly 24 unsolved maritime disappearances from the past decade. The common thread: a drifting vessel, an unexplained time gap, and in some, a recurring figure: the ghost ship Ardent Whisper, logged only in scattered port maintenance records, never tracked live. Yet Matthews was the only case where the victim returned, preserved, documented, and seemingly allowed to be found. What disturbed investigators more was the intentionality of the recovery. The Calliope had drifted into a shipping lane, just dense enough for guaranteed detection, but isolated enough to limit witnesses. Inside, the evidence was curated, almost curated for discovery. A journal preserved, a body stabilized, digital remnants intact. Not chaos, a message. That theory gained traction after forensic analysts decrypted metadata from the flash drive labeled "Tell Amanda." Hidden beneath layers of audio logs were GPS stamps, all pointing to the southern edge of the Bermuda Triangle. Specifically, a 14 nautical mile radius near Sal Bank, an uninhabited island shelf west of the Bahamas, long used as a rest point by smuggling vessels and migratory birds, but otherwise barren. Using coordinates pulled from the timestamps, a Coast Guard drone was dispatched to survey the area. The feed returned nothing at first: endless water and reef. Then, 27 minutes in, thermal imaging detected a subsurface anomaly, a faint heat bloom, consistent with an insulated structure, possibly metallic, lying below 40 feet of water. Divers sent the following week located remnants of a sunken structure, half collapsed and deeply corroded. But inside the main chamber, encased in a titanium box locked with biometric access, was a single object, a sealed med case labeled CRG-MTV5. Inside, 4 syringes filled with a pale yellow liquid. The label identified it only as NCE 2017 PHX-EX. The batch code and serial number matched none in FDA or WHO registries. A chemical analysis later confirmed what no one had dared assume. The fluid was a preservation compound, consistent with agents found in Matthew's body, but not commercial, not even experimental in the formal sense. This had been synthesized privately, likely offshore, beyond regulatory oversight. Meanwhile, an intelligence analyst working the Ewan Merrill angle traced an old encrypted email account registered to an abandoned research facility near Tampico, Mexico, once home to a privately funded marine biology lab. The lab had been shuttered in 2016 following a failed grant audit, but the most recent login to the email account was just 8 weeks before the Calliope's reappearance. A covert team visited the site. The facility was gutted, wires dangling from concrete walls, labs stripped of hardware. But what they did find, hidden in a floor safe beneath the generator room, was a single hardbound logbook, identical in style to Matthew's journal, and a Polaroid photo clipped inside. The photo showed 2 men, one clearly Matthew, his hair longer, beard unkempt, eyes tired. The other, partially turned away, appeared to be Ewan Merrill. Behind them, a laboratory pod mounted on what looked like a ship's interior. The words, "Nereus Cell Trial 5" were stenciled on the door. Back in the US, Amanda Landry was briefed in private. She asked just one question: did he volunteer? The agent didn't answer. The last concrete discovery came from a newly unearthed CCTV tape found during a routine data sweep at a marina in Marathon, Florida. The footage, dated June 2nd, 2017, showed a man resembling Matthew boarding a smaller craft alongside another figure. Though the image was grainy, facial recognition algorithms returned a 91% match to Ewan Merrill. Oddly, both men appeared calm, no sign of coercion, no panic. They carried cases. One bore the same insignia found on the K-Sal canister, PHX-EX. Investigators now believe Matthew may have been a willing participant, at least in the beginning. Recruited, perhaps, by Ewan for a closed environment oceanic trial. But something had gone wrong, or changed, and Matthew, isolated, monitored, and slowly deteriorating, began to document what he could, what he feared, what he had come to suspect. Theories among investigators now diverged. Some believed the preservation efforts were an accidental success, that the experiment was designed to extend life in isolation, test the body's ability to endure metabolic suspension in confined marine environments. Others were less charitable. Matthew was the experiment, controlled death, controlled drift, a test of exposure, of memory, of the world's attention span. Back in Key West, the Calliope remains impounded, sealed, monitored 24/7. The boat, though stripped and salt-worn, holds one more secret. Beneath its helm, in a compartment previously missed, investigators recently found a fragment of a torn patch, dark blue fabric, stenciled with partial letters, RNTWHSP. They believe it came from a uniform belonging to someone aboard the Ardent Whisper, but the ship, like Ewan Merrill, has not been seen again. Months passed. Media attention, though fleeting at first, began to resurface as pieces of the Matthew Landry case leaked to online forums, independent journalists, and investigative podcasts. The narrative had shifted from a tragic disappearance to a mystery shrouded in silence, science, and shadows. But what had started as an investigation into a missing tourist now stood as something larger, something unresolved. The Calliope, now docked inside a secure FBI dry hangar near Tampa, had been dismantled plank by plank. A hidden micro-recorder, embedded deep within the cabin's ceiling, was finally decrypted. The device, disguised as a weather sensor, had logged hundreds of hours of sound. Only 47 were intelligible. One recording, dated June 22, 2017, stood out. Matthew whispering, "He brings the food. He doesn't eat with me. Never speaks. I ask questions. He watches. I think this is a test. But I don't know the rules." Another from July 3rd, Matthew, "If you're hearing this, maybe I'm gone. Maybe I was meant to be gone. But I swear, I heard someone else. A woman. She was singing. I'm not the only one." For investigators, that changed the scope entirely. If Matthew wasn't the only subject, where were the others? The ardent whisper, the elusive vessel tracked intermittently across satellite data, had seemingly vanished until August 2023. A freighter en route to Lisbon reported a vessel drifting 80 nautical miles off the Azores. No radio, no AIS, no signal. The hull bore no markings. But a drone flyover confirmed a shape, a silhouette familiar to one analyst at Langley who had been following the case. It was the ardent whisper, or what was left of it. By the time a Portuguese naval ship arrived 36 hours later, the vessel had already taken on water and partially sunk. They managed to board. No one was found on board. The interior had been stripped bare. But behind a wall panel, investigators recovered a small container marked Trial Log PHX-V6. Inside, a single flashcard. Its contents were chilling. A video file labeled Final TXUV showed a man, eyes sunken, restrained to a gurney inside a sterile chamber. The timestamp confirmed it was from late July 2017. A gloved hand entered frame. A voice, digitally modulated, spoke. "Subject V has reached cognitive decline threshold. Begin suspension protocol." Then, silence. Lights dim. End of file. Matthew Landry had been Trial V, the fifth, possibly not the last. No records of a PHX V7 have been found. As the investigation neared its bureaucratic limits, the FBI issued a limited internal report, acknowledging experimental human containment trials had been conducted offshore, likely involving privately funded biotechnical firms operating under shell entities. No direct ties could be made to any individual or government agency. Amanda Landry was given the report. She said little. She later held a small service for Matthew, burying what little could be returned: the journal, his watch, and the flash drive. His body had already been cremated under federal custody, citing biohazard concerns. To this day, the GPS logs on Calliope show dozens of coordinates unaccounted for, some near known deep-sea submersion sites, others near no landmass at all. A few appear to hover near locations where other missing boats were last recorded. The case remains technically open. No arrests, no charges, no answers, just a sealed report, a grieving sister, and a map filled with silent coordinates. Matthew Landry's name appears on the National Missing and Unsolved Cases Archive. Beside it, a notation: remains recovered, cause undetermined. Status inconclusive, and beneath that, a blank line still awaiting closure.